Thank you all very much for joining us to hear from our final speaker as part of this year's Photo Ethics Symposium on the theme Ethics in the Age of AI, which is sponsored by Getty Images. This symposium aims to bring together a range of experts on AI and image making to focus on the ethical considerations of AI image generation. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our final speaker, Vera van der Burg. Vera is a designer and researcher specializing in artificial intelligence and design, currently pursuing a PhD at Delft Technical University's Designing Intelligence Lab. Her research focuses on exploring how AI can serve as a tool for self-reflection in the creative process. She combines practical design work with scholarly investigation, adopting a practice-based approach involving writing, publishing, making, and exhibiting. Her work spans various mediums, including written publications, video projects, visual art, and installations. It has been featured at events including the Dutch Design Week and Salon de Mobile in Milan, with her written contributions showcased at conferences including Designing Interactive Systems and Design Research Society. So I will hand it over to you now, Vera, if you want to share your...
Um, Can you see my slides?
Yes, they look great.
Perfect. Okay, welcome everyone. As was already introduced, my name is Vera, and I also had a really nice holding slide. And today I will talk to you a little bit about my research work in reflexive AI, specifically into image-based AI models. A little bit about myself. My name is Vera. I have a background in design and fine arts from the Design Academy in Eindhoven, and currently I'm doing a PhD at the Technical University in Delft, in which I explore the use of AI as a tool for self-reflection in creative practice. I'm towards the end of my PhD, so I'm very excited to present the work to you, what I've already been done for the past 4-ish, a little bit over years now. So the overarching goal of my PhD is to explore how artists, designers, I use these words a little bit interchangeably, so please, hope you understand. But how artists could explore or collaborate creatively with AI systems and what type of creative practices we could envision for them. And my work is practice-based, which means in my work, I try to gain new knowledge by the means of having my own creative practice with AI. So before I start to introduce my project, I would like to discuss generative AI with you. And I think you already had a lot of information about this for the past 2 days, but I will probably repeat a little bit. But if we think about the creative use of AI in creative practice, we see this. Lots of images or texts generated from large image generation models that we currently see all over the internet, over the news, over social media. Maybe you even have explored it yourself as well. They're very impressive. They're very high quality. They're perfect, streamlined, sometimes a bit weird, sometimes a bit problematic. But most of all, they're quite aesthetically pleasing stuff, and they all result from a very simple process, entering a simple text prompt into an interface that describes what you want. I'm not sure if someone already mentioned it. I can imagine they've done, but they're stemming from huge AI models that are called diffusion models, and they're trained on huge data sets scraped from the internet. Also, if we look into the interface of these models, this is specifically DALL-E from OpenAI, we see a very specific type of interaction, right? So it's a seemingly simple process. You just describe what you want through text. You don't even need an idea for an image. Now you can just press a button, surprise me, which results in an overload of the same type of images. But what we also see is that this interaction is actually very limited, a very strict way of using the tool that the developers suggested how we should use it. And even though the interface looks free, it doesn't give you a lot of options to control what comes out or what goes in. And as a user, you're just not as much in control. So what I think is important to realize with these systems is that they are created based on a technical development. So the ability to generate an image with the goal to optimize or automate a very specific human process, especially within creative practice. And in creative practice, we see these tools take a very specific role, right? So they take part of the generative phases, when some things need to be imagined fast, or when a multitude of visual options need to be generated to come to new ideas. But the bottom line of these models are that their interaction is very fast and very easy. But being a designer myself, and if I look at the simple way you can get to an output with such systems, I wonder, are there also other roles that this AI can take other than optimization, right? And then again, I'm thinking, is optimization of creative processes something that creatives, designers, or artists that are out there really need? As I know, when I look into my own creative practice, the best projects that I developed all stem from a specific pain. Those are projects that fail, that stem from ugly sketches, that you want to throw out of the window 6 times. And I wonder if these tools were made with this aspect of creative processes in mind. And I think no. Because when I think of creative processes, there's so much more than just generating things. And especially for artists, we make things because we have specific ideas or fascinations or interests. We make things because we have specific worldviews or positions within research topics, material preferences, likes, dislikes, styles. And from all that, our work comes about. And sometimes you're aware of these internal things. Sometimes it's hidden in our unconsciousness and it's very difficult to grasp or explain. And I think creative processes are therefore as much reflective as they are generative. Because if you are a creative, I think being a creative is as much about making things as it is about thinking about making those things and understanding why you've made a thing. And therefore, I wonder, would there be a possibility for AI to play a role in these more reflective phases of creative processes? Would it be possible to teach an AI, especially about those fascinations that I talked about, that we see in our creative practices that we might or might not understand in order to learn back from it? I wonder, could AI help us to reflect on ourselves and understand ourselves as artists by actively teaching it something about us? So as I do practice-based research, in order to explore these research questions, I make art, and I would like to present to you a couple that I've produced up until this point. And to understand why I found this reflective role for AI interesting, we go very much back in time, 2017, 2018, when I was a master's student in art and design school, and I was working on my graduation project. And during that time, working with AI in design or art was a niche. There wasn't much available or accessible, not like we know it right now. There was one thing that I found my interest, which is the object recognition model. And the object recognition model is a specific type of AI that you use to recognize things in the visual world. And what is nice about this model is that you can easily train it yourself. And it's also quite accessible for people who are not that experienced with coding. But more specifically, what I liked about this tool is that you can teach it something about what the world looks like. So, for example, these models are used for self-driving cars, right? And if we see this object detection model, we can all agree on what the model detects here. It's cars, it's pedestrians, etc. But there's so much more in the street scene to be seen. And even though in this example, we all look at the same reality, we all might perceive something else. So what about that extra information, right, that we feel when we're looking at the scene? What about the palm trees? Do they remind you of the beach? Is the sunset reminding you of some kind of summer holiday you once had? Is it capitalism because we're driving on Rodeo Drive? So in order to understand the object recognition model, I try to work with a couple off-the-shelf tools and start to showing it all these weird objects that I had lying around my desk. And it made all of these misinterpretations. And this made me realize, what else can we teach a machine other than what we objectively see out there? Would I be able to teach this machine more about how I see things? So if you want to train your own models, you need data. And in this case, the data is image data. And so my computer looked a lot like this: folders and folders and folders filled with scraped images of normal things, objects, chairs, etc. But quickly I started to realize that if I wanted to teach this model about how I see things, I should find different data that maybe would represent me more than just these folders filled with boring chairs. So I started to collect images that would represent certain emotions for me, like sadness, as you see in the example here. And then my computer started to look more like this. And this whole act of collecting data that was meaningful to me or that would represent my emotions was something that I called subjective data collection. And therefore I thought, if we want to use AI in creative processes, can we actually rethink the way we train them? Could we actually use the fact that they're able to produce biased outputs and instead seeing that as something negative as a starting point for training an AI system in order to learn from it? So from this, I made 3 speculative films that imagined what a subjectively trained object detection system could look like if it would analyze 3 artworks that I'd made. And the goal of this work was more to generate questions and thinking about how we could teach an object detection system differently for creative purposes. And later on, for the next project, which was already in my PhD, I actually tried to come up with a method of training an AI in a reflective way with a group of artists. So in order to explain this project, I would like to start showing you this image, and I would ask you to think for yourself, what do you see? And when I look at this image, I see a lot of things, right? I feel uncomfortable, but I also feel attracted. I'm intrigued, but I'm also quite disgusted. I think the image is beautiful, but I also think it's very strange. So what I realized is that even in my own design work, I have a fascination for surrealism. And I do not know exactly why, but I see this fascination coming back into the art and design work that I make. Therefore, I wonder, can I understand my fascinations better if I explore them more explicit? So for this project, we were interested in fascinations, and we wanted to see if we could explore and understand them through the use of artificial intelligence. So with 2 other designers, we each performed an AI annotation cycle. And the AI tool that we chose to work with was, again, the object detection model. And by doing this with 3 artists, we wanted to see, even though we were totally 3 different artists, if we had any commonalities in our processes and to see how we each would kind of approach this task of training. So we started with collecting a data set of fascinations that represented our fascinations. Then we chose labels to annotate that data set with. Then we annotated the data set, and then we trained and tested the model on our own design work. And these steps were inspired by the way normal object detection models are trained. So in order to collect a data set of your fascinations, you really have to think about what should be in this data set. So you're thinking about what visually represents your fascination and what collection of images could you use for this. So as I mentioned before, I have a fascination for surrealistic art. So I handpicked a data set filled with 378 images of my favorite paintings of Dali and Magritte. The second designer in the project was Gijs, and he was interested in the relationship between humans and plants. And he collected a data set of 300 images of gardens. And the final designer was Maurik, and Maurik is a designer that works in public space. He makes artistic interventions in public space, and he was fascinated by the design of public space and arts, and he decided to use a data set of art in public space in his hometown in Rotterdam, and these were about 120 images. So to annotate a data set, you first need to know what labels you want to use to annotate the data set with, right? So in the case of object detection for self-driving cars, it's quite straightforward, as you need words like bike, car, etc. to become the labels. But in case of annotating fascinations, we started to realize you need some kind of different word. So these words need to describe specific feelings or judgments. So we use this tool to organize our feelings in kind of these opposing ways. And we each came up with all these kind of different words that would describe our judgments towards the fascination, the data set filled with our fascinations. So for example, mine were uncanny, teasing, absurd, and excessive. Gijs chose filthy, glorious, luring, and lonely, and Maurik chose creepy, inviting, stubborn, and excluding. And then when we had the labels, we needed to annotate the data set. And annotation is done, yeah, I think it's running, yeah. Through a tool that allows you to go through the data set and select those instances in an image that correspond with the label that you have selected. And the annotation task allowed us to really zoom into the image, right? And looking at an image in this way is a bit strange because the model needs to look at this image as this collection of small parts. I mean, if I look at this image, I just see the full image, but the model needs to know exactly like what is this specific thing and this specific thing. So it's a very strange way of looking at an artwork or at an image. But actually, if you force yourself to look in such a way, it kind of opens up new ways of how you're actually looking. So you start to see way more details, you start to think about each detail, and you start to think about what do I think of it. And at the beginning, this task was very long and tedious. It took us days to annotate these data sets fully. However, it gradually started to help us understand what we meant visually with subjective concepts that we chose, like uncanny. And this task really allowed us to look and ask, what do I see here? And what do I feel by that? And actually looking at 300 images that you like is actually pretty nice. So then there was a training phase. So one for Maurik, one for Gijs, one for me. And then we had these like 3 object detection models that were trained and ready to be tested. And we didn't just want to test it on any image that we had in our archives, but we actually wanted to create a new image for this model to look at. And we came up with this way to test this model to make an artwork that we called object portraits. And these object portraits would needed to be created in the style of the data set and therefore in style of our fascinations. And we carefully selected all these objects that we made in the past and that we were curious about, like what would the AI think of these objects? For example, in the case of Gijs, he wanted to create a garden with his objects and used the Garden of Eden as a reference image to do so. And in my case, I made a surrealistic painting, obviously, by adding all these objects that I had once made or collected. And the ultimate test was now to see what the trained algorithm would see in our work. And I have a small video now that's kind of recapping this entire process and also showing the end results. It will be about 3 minutes. So after we had tested the model with our object portraits, we discussed our insights and the reflections on the process, of which I will discuss the most important one. What we realized is that the reflection doesn't only happen when the AI makes an interpretation of our artworks, but it actually happens throughout the entire process of annotation, data collection, and creating this artwork for the AI to look at. And the interpretations kind of became starting points for us to think about how did we actually train this model. So if the model annotated one of my objects as uncanny, it would invite me to think, okay, but do I agree? Do I disagree? How can I figure out why it's uncanny? Is it something that I did in the data set? Should I add more data? Should I go back to it? So it became this kind of reflective interaction with the model instead of just taking their predictions as the truth. And this work kind of became an installation at Dutch Design Week in which we kind of try to expose audiences to these portraits. And we try to mimic the artist's studio as if this was like an artwork in process. And we also showed the annotation task in this rather physical way to kind of create this idea that this training phase is a very material process, right? So that's a very lots of labor, lots of handwork actually goes into the training of these systems. So concluding, we could say that we had the feeling that we used some of AI's limitations like small data sets, annotation bias, as kind of these starting points for creative self-exploration. And we really found this value in slowing down the AI designer collaborative creative practice by adding these training phases to the creative interaction. Yeah, and this is kind of something that I already said. And the thing is, we didn't stop here. We decided to do it with a group of students. So we did the same process and we even made it more organized, and we had all these students do the same thing, basically. So they all collected the data sets, and they collected the data set that was more about their research interests. They trained their own subjective models and they made their own object portraits. And what was interesting for this process was mainly that they were all able to kind of bring in their own personal interest in the tool instead of having the feeling that you're kind of out of control of using an AI that works other people's work, that uses other people's work or other people's views, and that it doesn't really feel like the interaction is yours. And here you can see this overview of this diversity of weird topics and questions the students had that they use as these starting points in training their own models. And we also ask them to do the same thing, like find the labels, give them, reflect a little bit on why you choose this. And they all also made here, for example, Aisha, who made an object portrait based on her interest in religious events. There was a person interested in queer fashion and a guy interested in Rubens paintings. And we all created these like collective reflection moments where we would talk about their object portraits and the AI interpretations and reflect on, okay, how does this make you look at your work in this different way? Yeah, and then again, this process of annotations and model use kind of became this methodological tool, which guides the students like on their reflection. And there was one student who really said this interesting thing. It's like when you teach an AI about yourself, you also learn how you see yourself. Yeah, they gained a lot of ownership and agency over the process, as already mentioned. And this slowness, again, was this very important pillar in like taking it slow, taking the time to really craft each step. So from these three projects, the reflexive AI method kind of emerged, right? And the most important thing for me to describe this method is that we see AI models more as processes, flexible material processes that we as users can actually craft and interact with, instead of seeing it as this ready-made tool that we have to use because they're being offered to us through a software service. Again, these slow interactions are very important, that you really take the time to craft your own data. And even though these processes are normally being taken away from the user and done by these large corporations that are training these models for you, we actually want to expose that process and seeing it as a beautiful process actually that you can actually do to learn about what your interests are. And this also really goes against the idea that we're doing this to create something that's optimizing you, right? But it's more about slowing you down and making you more aware. Then what's also important is that if the AI gives you an output, even if it's an image, if it's a text, if it's a detection, that's not the end goal, but it becomes this starting point to speculate on how did I train, what do I want to do with this, and how am I going to take the next step in my practice. And again, these limitations that are normally seen as limitations like bias and small data sets as these creative spaces. So whereas again, these tools by OpenAI and whatever are saying we need more data to create these models that work for everyone, we're more interested in this personal use of, okay, what if we flip that and if we just use a model for one person, then it can be biased and then you can kind of explore what's needed, like more specific models for specific groups of people. And then as the last projects I want to show, it's still very much in process. As you probably realized, I mainly work with object detection, which is a very specific form of AI, and that already always had my interest most, but I also feel the pressure to work with generative AI as well. Which is kind of quite difficult because normally these tools are really difficult to train yourself. They are Midjourney, for example, it's very closed off. You cannot see the data set, you cannot see the code, but there's this one model called Stable Diffusion, and they offer opportunities to get their code and to train it yourself. So that's where I saw an opportunity. This is work in process, so there's not really an insight yet, but the starting point is, okay, if artists want to work with image generation and they need to train their own tools, what is interesting for these artists to train these tools on? And I thought, what about projects from the past? So projects that you have stored somewhere on your hard drive, lots of images, you never really, they never really went somewhere, or they were created in design school maybe. And can you kind of relive these projects by training an image generation model on them? And maybe if you start with the idea that you want to learn something from your own data, I want to investigate how does that influence the entire interaction process when you start training and prompting such a model. So data collection, also a very physical exercise where I try to kind of collect as many images as I had from my own work that I made in the past and see what are the categories. What do I want to focus on? And I focused on one specific project, which was a chair that I once made. And annotation, again, kind of works like this. You have to describe the image, which is also a very strange process because I never made this chair with the idea that I wanted to describe it, but you have to kind of translate the image into a text format, which is a very interesting exercise. And you have to do it with like 50 images. So it goes over and over and over again. And then you can actually train an image generation model on a very small piece of data. And then you can start to prompt. So here it's a technical story. I'm not going to go too deep into it, but you start to see that the model is able to generate all these new constellations or shapes of your own work. It takes your own style, it takes the materials, and it's up to me as I am actually the creator of this work, original work, to think of, okay, how does this give me a new perspective on this chair, and what did that chair mean to me back in the days, and how can I relive that in the current state of being. Well, there are some examples of what I tried out with ceramic work, the chair, and then another ceramic piece. Yeah, so concludingly, I would like to pursue this reflexive AI method, or at least kind of this movement maybe, where I want to see how we can change our behavior or change our especially in research, our approach to AI as being this tool that optimizes, as being this tool that can actually, help us to slow down and to really think about things instead of blindlessly generating a lot of images. There are lots of things. So the role of the AI has a reflective role. Obviously, the skill is really about crafting data sets, small data sets. Hopefully, you can work very locally, which also means that you don't need to work on very large external servers that have a lot of high energy consumption, but you can actually train your tools on a smaller console. Yeah, and instead of the AI giving you the truth, it might take a more critical role in showing you something that you can think of, hey, I never thought of that before. And so by doing so, I'm hoping to create more sustainable creative interactions with AI for the future. I'm exactly within 30 minutes. So this was my presentation. Thank you for listening.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Vera, I feel like I got so caught up in listening to what you're saying that I didn't write down very many questions. So hopefully, members of the audience as well will have lots of questions to ask you because I think it just really got me thinking. And I have sort of a few comments which we can work together to craft into questions, if you will. Um, I think the first thing that I think is really interesting, and I just want to highlight for, especially for those people who have been here throughout several of the sessions, is this idea of object detection is not something that we really talked very much about earlier on in the symposium, but it's a critical part of that leads to the creation of generative AI models, and um, on the Photo Ethics podcast, I interviewed um, I don't think he's a photographer, a photo editor, I guess, called Mohammed Al Nabani, who started um, an Arab stock image database, and they're training their own AI model. And the point that he made in the podcast, which I think is relevant to this discussion, is that they were using people who are from the region to do the tagging, because if people are not of the region, they might not be able to identify the nuances and the different objects that are present in images in Arab stock imagery. And so I don't know if you want to speak to that a little bit, Vera, but I just struck me that that's not something that we really backgrounded, and I think it in the symposium, but I think it's super relevant for thinking about your work.
Um, Yeah, so if I want to go back to your first comment about the object detection model not being that highlighted, it's actually pretty interesting because we don't do that, because what we see with what is AI right now is generative AI, image generation, text generation. It's like this idea, and we talked about it earlier, like my work never started from that. My work started with object detection. My work started with a fascination for teaching a system how you see things. I thought that was a very interesting given because it's so limited, but still we're trying to have these systems pretend like they're people or pretending they can do specific human tasks. And then from a technical point of view, the fact that an image knows what something is the first basis of image generation as well. So image generation is basically a generative model and a detection model combined. So it's really important to realize that there is a level of supervised learning that goes in, that someone has mentioned to this model through something, either if it's through, metadata of images on the internet, that something, an image means this is a cat, this is a dog. There is a human labor behind that. And highlighting that and thinking about that specifically, I think is really important when we use these models, because it's never the truth. It's like maybe what we all accept on being the truth, but it's still very subjective representation of what we think is a cat or a person or whatever. Yeah, and I think your second comment about the I think the Arab, I think that's we see these approaches way more, and it's difficult because these tools are obviously developed with the idea we need to make sure they work for everyone, because they're being used to us, like ChatGPT is, or like DALL-E is, and everyone who wants it can use it and should have a use for it. But obviously there are many groups in the world that cannot, or that feel not as comfortable or as represented by how these tools work or what type of output they give. And I think it's really interesting to have very specific groups of people with specific backgrounds think about what that data means to them and adding that. And I think we also need to kind of get away from the idea that more data will result in more diversity, because that's not really the case, as we can see, because already these images, or these generated image generators are trained on billions of images, and they still, if you type in a business person, you get a man, la la. It is just the reflection of the internet, So yeah, I feel like it's not about, it's especially about what these Arab photographer does. That's where the opportunity lies, or at least the solution lies, is making it way more specific. but there's not that much money in that. So I guess that's why they tend to overlook this, and they have all these tricks. So they create filters. So I'm not sure if you heard this example of now you can, I think it was with Gemini, that you can generate an image of the Pope and it becomes a female woman of color, which is impossible. But because they added the filters, it becomes this interesting construct, right? It's like it's not reality because this never happened before, and it's impossible that a woman of color will become the Pope. But still, this image generation who tries to be diverse generates this image, and I think these are very interesting tensions to explore. Yeah.
That was super interesting. And just a reminder to everybody, you can pop your questions in the chat or you can raise your digital hand. Um, I think another thing that really struck me when you were talking is something that came up in the conversation that I had with John Keelam on Wednesday about because he was giving a lecture on creativity, and we were talking a little bit about like, do you need sort of the mundane, the repetition, the um, labor of sort of maybe undesirable activities, but is that necessary for creativity? And it reminded me of what you said about how like your projects that fail have ended up being the most successful. And I feel like I've seen that a lot in my own creative practice where it's like all of the failures actually led to something that I wouldn't have predicted. I couldn't have envisioned the outcome if I hadn't had the failures along the way. And so I don't know. Again, there's not really a question in that. It's more of well, I guess there's a question like, does how does this then fulfill maybe that need for the mundane, I guess, because you do a lot of mundane work in the labeling and the annotating.
Yeah. I mean, if you are a painter, or if you are an image maker or whatever, if you are a digital photographer, which are maybe a couple of them are in the talk there, then you have this, this huge project process. And you think about, okay, what do I want to do? And then you start to make a sketch, and then you start to make the photos, and then you need to do the photo editing, and then you need to put everything together. And these repetitive works are very important to the process. Even with writing, for example, which I think is an even bigger problem is ChatGPT when it comes to writing skills, is writing is an engine that you need to put on, and you need to do it every day, and then you get better. It's not something that you can or cannot do. It's something that comes with training. You can get better in it, and it's painful to translate your thoughts into text, even though the same as it can be painful and you have this idea in your head for ceramic work or specific, and then you start to make it in reality and it's nothing like you experience. You put it in the oven, it explodes because somewhere you made a mistake, and you're like, okay, shit, and that already influences your next step. And all these things, we should not be ignorant to them and think of them being very important moments of learning, and getting to know material and getting to know yourself. Like, okay, then you can actually say like, okay, I'm really bad at making long sentences or short sentences, or I don't know, and then you can go about that. But uh, with these tools, I mean, not necessarily with image generation, because I don't feel like those tools were made for artists at all. They're not interested in them either. So but with text, it's like even before you realize it, you give away a lot of stuff that you can learn. And I feel like we're trying to get away of friction in our lives a little bit. So we want everything to be smooth and fast, so it fits our fast lives. But actually, that's kind of sad. I feel like there's lots in skill development and learning, and I don't see the reason why we should not be able to do that with AI as well, honestly. And I think it would be really fun to do that with AI, like to kind of realize like, oh, this is where it's a mistake, make a mistake. And that's where also I feel a more equal or a more, yeah, interesting interaction finds place.
I
Does that?
think, yeah, yeah, no, I think that that word friction is really interesting and really important because last year I attended Photo Vogue and the theme was AI imagery, and that was something I can't remember. I think it was someone from Google was saying that they're trying to take away the friction of creating. And that sort of idea really stuck with me and really sort of, I don't know, caught my attention. And it made me think more about, yeah, the mundane and how we value that. And I think there's another thing that you mentioned, which struck me about how output is not the goal. And that struck me as quite like an anti-capitalist approach to AI, which is, I think so much of the AI that we see is very rooted in a very neoliberal capitalist ideology about creation, and efficiency.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit.
I mean, even creativity is the concept of creativity is a capitalistic idea, right? Like, oh, everyone, if we define it, then we can do it, and then we can come to better ideas and bigger ideas and la la la. So I feel like that goes even way more back than these AI models. But sorry, can you one more say? I'm sorry. Sometimes I lose my.
Yeah, no, don't worry at all. Just the idea that the output isn't the goal.
Yeah. No, and that's also the way it's being presented to us, right? Like it's output machines. It's very output oriented because you ask it something and you get something in return. So and it's finished what they give you. They give you something and it looks you cannot really go about it. I mean, with text it's different. I don't really go into text that much, but with an image, it's like every time I generate something, I'm like, yeah, but now it's done. And I cannot really imagine um how I can use this for anything other than maybe a birthday card or something. And it's not, and there are goals for output. For example, if you want to generate stuff very fast and you need to generate this very basic idea of something, then maybe it's there. But yeah, it's basically offering you a solution to a problem that doesn't really exist,
Mm,
right? So it's like, here you can generate images, and then whoever wanted that, there are a lot of people very good at that and doing that by hand or whatever, they 3D model everything. There was never a need to automate it, but that's what I tried to say in the beginning. All these tools, they don't come from needs, they come from technological development. They come from the fact that there's a computer scientist in a university who is with a team making image generation, but not with the idea of, okay, how can I capitalize this, or how can someone use this? And it only takes OpenAI's, funding to say, okay, let's open source it to everyone and then see how people are using it. And then we come up with that the fact that it's a solution. Whereas I think nobody had an issue with asking people to generate an image for a specific thing. Maybe it costs a lot because it's a person, or maybe it's taking a lot of time and we don't have that in the time. Yeah, maybe. So definitely the idea of fastness in this branch, it's very capitalistic way of looking at these tools. Yeah, for sure. There's a question.
absolutely. Yeah, there's a question here from Julia, who says what you're doing is fascinating and brilliant, but devil's advocate, if we want to slow process down, surely AI iterations achieve the opposite since they operate so much faster than reflexive process of making iterations ourselves. Furthermore, do we want AI to do the creative part of our job for us? Isn't it a big enough threat to the creative community without us teaching it how to do the intangible stuff that separates us from the machines?
Hi, I
Yeah.
feel I should actually just speak as well because
Yeah, go for it.
Vera actually answered quite a bit of that
Okay.
as I hit send. But um, I do have great concerns about AI, and a part of that it comes from my own background. I worked in computer-aided design during the early 80s, the whole of the 90s, and most of the noughties. And what I saw was what we were selling was we can make your job easier. We can take the grind out of what you're doing. We
Yeah.
can those colorways you spend hours and hours painting by hand. We can put the colors into the computer and get it to just flow through a number of different options for you. You're still the designer, you still pick the colorway. It's not the computer doing the work. And I always used to say the everything stops with the person on the end of the mouse. What we didn't expect was how the industry would use that. What we thought would happen, and our intention was we will reduce wasteful sampling. We will reduce the stress on designers who won't be working so much overtime for no pay because they'll be able to actually produce a visualization faster and more accurately. What happened? The industry says, great. Instead of 45 designs, we want 145. Oh, you can do that. I tell you what, we want 500. And when I started in the textile industry, we had 2 collections a year. It became 4, it became 8. Most high street fashion places do a drop every week now. So actually, I feel really terrible about working in computer-aided design in the 90s because it's trashing the planet completely. And my concerns with AI are what I've just written, but also the taking, not only are we trashing the planet with AI because the amount of water, the amount of electricity it uses, I don't know how we justify what we're doing with AI, frankly. And I just fear that, I mean, with the fashion and textile industry, all we've done is devalue design completely. That's what's really behind what I tried to put more succinctly. I'd love to hear what you think, Vera, and anyone else.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I agree. Yeah, obviously I agree. And maybe it's a bit of a utopian idea that I have, that I feel like, oh, we all want to be designers and reflecting on ourselves and la la la. And like, I'm not, this, the point of the work is not that I force anyone to do this or to kind of, say this is the way it should be. But I just hope to create this awareness that it can be different. We can have this different, or at least we should think about a different relationship to this technology. Because if we expose this, the harms and kind of show, at least for me, I feel like the work really is for designers, design researchers, artists that are interested, that want to work with it, and showing them, okay, so this is actually what it takes to train a model or to work with it, then it maybe spark some ideas of interacting with it. And yeah, no, I actually have not a lot of big comments on your question, because I fundamentally agree, that also within AI we need a slow movement. And
Yeah.
it's happening. There are researchers, there is this slow AI movement. I think it's run by Timnit Gebru, and she thinks from it from the research perspective. So she's like, we need to slow the development practice, the development down, and give more time for research, and specifically this type of research that really looks into the needs and the practices of people working with it, and the consequences of using these tools on a larger scale than just the user interface or the user friendliness of the tool, right? But that takes time. Research, academic research, and I'm realizing it now being 4.5 years, it takes a very long time. So the slow AI movement goes into these different directions of research, but also in, yeah, what you say, resources. Can you make an organic form of artificial intelligence? It is possible. Obviously, it is more difficult. It takes more time. You have not as much data, you cannot do everything in the cloud, but it is possible.
The real question is, should we?
Yeah,
You touched on it earlier on. It solved a problem that didn't exist. We
yeah.
have so many problems that do exist, and AI can be invaluable in solving the problems that do exist.
Even yeah.
It,
Even with this, there's so many problems. Like I feel like we're all being distracted by questions like, is it creative? Will it replace humans? Will it ever be artificial general intelligence? Whereas the actual things that we should concern about is the fact that we have thousands and thousands of click workers and data workers that are on a very low pay trying to make these models work for you, and no one ever sees that or talks about that in this way that these models do. So I feel like, yeah, we're being distracted
that's a very
by
good
the
point.
idea of innovation,
Yeah.
the science fiction threat. And I feel like these companies are feeding this narrative a lot to kind of, distract us from what's actually going on with these problems. And then with these tools. And then you have some Sam Altman who's like, yeah, I know it's very, very polluting. And then it's like, okay, that's it. That's all he needs to say. And then nothing really happened. So I don't know. I'm not sure if we should actually, if I talk about it right now.
I mean, I think that
Leave
that's
it.
also I think the thing that I really appreciate about the work that you're doing, though, as well, is that the cat's out of the bag, with AI, in that, like, it doesn't appear to be going anywhere. So I think that the critical and slow approaches to AI that you're introducing do offer, if not a functional alternative that might be picked up commercially, it offers a critical view of it, which can maybe cause people to slow down and think and be more reflexive in other ways, about exactly what you're saying, Julia, you know, about like, is this what's needed? Is this appropriate? Is this the right method forward? Vera, do you want to come?
Yeah, I just kept on thinking we had this critical AI reading group and we would talk about all the problems with AI. And we were all AI researchers within the design faculty. And then at some point we realized, what are we doing? We should just get out and leave. And it's this idea of how can you make your impact, right? Is it from the outside pointing in or from the inside and showing, do you want to be in and trying to drive change, or do you want to be out and trying to do it? So I'm still in the middle of figuring this out. Like, I don't think even the technical university is the perfect fit for me or surrounding for me, because the computer science faculty is next to our faculty, and they're just keeping on coding and programming better functional models and faster and better and scalable and la la la. So, and it's good that these things also exist next to each other, but it's as having a critical approach in AI, it's really important to think about, like, okay, where is my impact? Where can I actually, spread my ideas, and how can I make sure that I don't lose faith in in the fact that it might not ever become something that we should want. I don't know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Laura, do you have a question there? Oh, I can't hear you actually. Can anyone else hear Laura? No. Sorry. Do you want to type it?
You could try adjusting the audio.
Oh, she's gonna
There
go.
we go. AirPods, that'll help. Very good. All right, hold tight.
No.
Nothing yet. Okay. All right. You maybe type your question if you, yeah. Okay, cool. I don't need to sign, do I? Like you can hear me. I don't know why I'm doing this. Yeah, that would be great. While Laura is typing her question, the I think that there's something else that you said that really struck me, which was about we talked a lot about bias this morning in the panel, and I really loved the way that you are flipping that on its head and saying, like, can bias be useful? Can we use that in some positive way? And I guess I wanted to know if you have any, like, what are the broader implications for the industry in thinking in those terms? And do you have any, I guess, recommendations for thinking about maybe larger AI models and how we can use that in a more reflexive way? Is that possible?
Yeah, I mean, I see more and more approaches emerging that of people who are using AI tools to kind of expose bias. So let me think. I mean, there are two ends of this. I mean, you have the user end and the developer end, and I think more and more they start to kind of, also from the research fields, creating these auditing systems. So users can actually audit a model, which means they can check if the model is right or not. And that's either on the use level or on the data collection level. So it's like, checking, is this data representative, but also that data scientists are being more stimulated in adding all this information, in what conditions these data sets were created and from what viewpoint and for what goal. So there are strategies, especially in research, that are now slowly being developed into, like, okay, how can we actually reduce bias in all these different stages of the machine learning pipeline, from developing till user end. But the data sets have already been collected. The models have already been trained. It's pretty difficult to go away from that. So I think most of it lies in user testing and seeing, like, okay, what are the problematic things, and they can only do that through use, because 9 out of 10 times these developers don't even know how these systems came to their decisions, because it's such a complex process. So you need users to expose what's wrong. You need to use users to expose, like, okay, hey, if you type in Pope, you never get a woman or something. I don't know, which is also true, or if you type in, I don't know, the other day I typed in with Midjourney a Dutch man, and then you get Rembrandt. only images of Rembrandt. And I'm like, okay, how can you change that? And do we even want to change that also, right? So I also had this other conversation this week about, okay, maybe we want everyone to be in this data set, but maybe not everyone wants to be represented in these tools. And that's also a thing, right? Like we just feel like, oh, we should just add more data or add less data. But what about asking people that are in their works or whatever if they even want to be involved in these tools? So I guess there's so much angles to explore. There's so much to learn. But I feel like we're running behind this monster kind of, or this like very big engine that's already moving, So yeah, I'm not sure if that answers your question. I'm just kind of
No,
going.
totally. And I think that's something that has come up in a couple of the panels this week as well, is, AI technologies as colonization, and like, is that what we want? Do we want them to then appropriate images and data about communities around the world? Is that the goal?
Yeah.
So I think that's definitely, that's a really valid point. Um, and I also wanted to sort of go to the point, which is in the title of your talk, about reflexivity. Because reflexivity, as an anthropologist, reflexivity is something that we're very keen on in anthropology. And I guess I was wondering if you could maybe describe for us, what is the value of reflexivity for photographers, or image makers, and why is reflexivity important? And maybe, yeah, how can we continue to apply that in light of generative AI?
Oh, it's to me, I think it's a really, really good question. And also to me, it's a given because I feel like it's always important to think about the things, why you're doing them and why you're choosing specific angles. I mean, nothing comes from nothing, it always has a starting point in who you are. And I have the idea that if you have a bit of a grip or a viewpoint on what your work comes from or what your ideals are, makes you a better maker. So, and then also I think specifically thinking about your own biases, which can then be negative, obviously, it's very valuable to think like, hey, are the things that I don't see or that I do see, or and I do this in this very friendly way. So for example, for my surrealism project, I was like, oh no, I realize everything that this has a bit of a body part, I call it uncanny. But then I was like, why do I actually do that? Like, what does that say about the way I perceive body parts in this specific context, So for me, the reflexivity is not necessarily in the AI. And this is also a very hard debate I have with computer science, because the title suggests that the AI is reflexive, The AI is the one that's reflexive and that reports that, no, to me, reflexivity happens within you. And you need something to take it out. And then you can become aware of how you think, but it's not something that does, like, it cannot be in a system, because the system will not do it if it doesn't have your own experience in it. So I see it more as the system, more as a therapist, that generates a space for you to think about yourself instead of saying to you, this is how you should do it. So yeah, I think having that awareness for makers, photographers, anyways, to me, it's a given that that's important. But then, yeah, does it answer your question? I think that's, I'm not so
Yeah,
sure.
I think so. And I think, that idea of the AI, using it as like a therapist, like you said, or like a mirror, like you said in your
Yeah,
presentation,
exactly.
I
Yeah.
think is really useful, as a tool for reflection, literally. So absolutely. Does anybody else have any other questions before we wrap up?
Do you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, took a while to connect. Well, I was saying thanks for this talk. It's super interesting. I've been listening, and I wanted to, as I said, advocate on the use of AI in photography. I'm a photographer. I've been working in photography for 20 years, and the last two I've been very much focused on AI photography. And I I want to add this philosophical perspective and see how do you feel. But when we are saying that AI is very much limited to its data set or its training, I really think that each of us are also limited to our data that we have. We don't have all the data. And photography is also a perspective, like digital or traditional photography is also a perspective. So I think we are scrutinizing too much AI in that sense, and putting us, we have the perspective of reality when we don't have it anyways. I mean, it's never too so much objective, and that people, the audiences, are now not trusting the images out there. I think it's a good thing. I in the future, I wouldn't advocate for, oh, let's trust in the images again. No, let's always not trust in the images, because they have been tricking us, or no image is so it's the perspective of everyone. It's just the perspective of the one has done. And also about how the creative industry, how this impacts in the creative industry. First, being working on images, like I work creating images on demand. It's not fast to create images on AI if you want to do it like as the idea is, if you want to really reach the idea. If you get in halfway saying, okay, these are the biases, these are the funny mistakes, you stay halfway. But if you want to do a proper AI image, it takes lots of time. And I don't think it overruns the work of creatives. It overruns, it standardizes the work of people or human that are copying other stuff. So now the copy industry is just for AI. It's now I think AI separates what is really creative and what is a copy, because now making a copy is super fast, but being creative, the idea is still the idea. It's human. It's always human. And arriving to this idea, it could be with watercolor, with photography, or with AI. It's always a long process. So for instance, regarding the data set that we have in the conversation earlier, we put, I think it was, I don't remember the name, I'm very bad at names, but there was like, why there are not so many bald men represented. And I would say, why there aren't bald women? It's because we don't have them in our data. We don't see many bald women because bald women use wigs. So why? Because, I mean, we are also narrowed. And when we ask for diversity, we are also narrowed.
Yep, Vera, do you want to comment on that? Thank you for your question, Laura.
As in, there are just like us, that's what you're saying. Like, if we want them to be more representative of everyone, it's impossible because we're also biased. So it's the same. Basically, that's what you're saying, right? Yeah. Yeah, but we are flexible. We are able to realize like, hey, this doesn't work. So the tool just gives an output. And I feel like there's a certain responsibility, I feel, that you have to make sure that if you're saying that your tools can be used by everyone, that it's actually true, and also, or saying it's not, but I'm not really sure if I understand you correctly. So you're saying you're in favor of AI photography, and it's the same, and it's just like working with any other tool, like it's the same as painting, or yeah. I mean, I do agree there is I know that with prompting, it can be very difficult to get out what you want. And it can be a very crafty process as well. So, yeah, and I also don't want to disacknowledge that, I think. But for me, it's more about the fact that these tools are being offered to us as solutions to everything, right? And how they're being marketed. I think that's to me where where the critical points lie. And sometimes if I see, for example, AI exhibitions about AI in photography, the images are really nice, but then I also think, is it really a nice image? Is it, or am I just amazed by the fact that it was AI? If I take away the description that says AI or the framing, this is AI, is it still a nice image? And in my personal experience, lots of times I think it's not the case. But that's personal, right? So and only the people that kind of embrace this craftiness of it, or have a way of exhibiting or showcasing their process in their work, feel like, to me, it sparks more, it speaks more. So that's a personal approach, I think. Yeah.
Great.
Sure if that answers, but
Thank you so much to everyone for your contributions. I think if there are no other questions, no. Do you have any concluding remarks, Vera, that you want to end on? Just to sum up, summing up with ideas, or no? Are you happy to leave it there?
I'm super happy. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, I'll just maybe conclude a little bit with a short statement just to sort of bring the conclusion of the symposium together. So I do want to just thank you all for attending this year's Photo Ethics Symposium. I think that we have covered quite a lot of ground on a very broad topic over the past 3 days. Just to recap and reflect back on what we've done, on Wednesday, we considered the role of AI in creativity as John Key Lim discussed the role of AI in creative education, and he encouraged us to consider what kind of labor is being outsourced when we incorporate AI technologies in the classroom or in our creative processes. Dr. Amira Kawash and Jake Elwes shared with us how they have used AI as part of their creative practices, particularly in order to disrupt, expand, or otherwise challenge hegemonic generative AI technologies. So through a discussion with Dr. Tara Pixley, they stressed the need for artists to be integrally involved in the process of making these tools and not just using these tools. On Thursday, we heard from Shirin Anlin, Alex Mahadevan, and Lynn Walsh in conversation with Dr. David Campbell on the topic of AI and public trust. And they each shared the work that they're doing in their respective organizations toward improving public trust in the media, focusing especially on the importance of transparency as an ethical imperative. This morning, I spoke with Mutale Nakonde and Dr. Rebecca Swift about representation through AI technologies, or generative AI technologies in particular. And they explained the limitations of AI to offer diverse and representative images because generative AI is built using a monocular images of the past to illustrate our present. And we've concluded the symposium with a fantastic talk by Vera Vanderburg on ways of using sort of that image identification, AI object identification in a creative practice of reflexivity. So I know that I have learned so much from our speakers. Their contributions greatly expanded my understanding of the challenges, limitations, and also the opportunities presented by AI technologies. And I really hope that the same is true for all of you who've joined over the past 3 days. So please keep your eyes out for in your inbox for an invitation to complete a survey about your experience of the symposium. We'll also be sharing the recordings with you at that time. Please also consider staying in touch with the Photography Ethics Center after the symposium. You can find a range of resources, including recordings of symposia in previous years, on our website at www.photoethics.org. So thank you again for your attention and your participation, and we hope to see you back at future events. All right, have a great weekend, and thank you, Vera.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.